Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View. In this first hour, we're going to talk about life. Some of these pro-life bills, the issue of abortion, I think you're really going to appreciate the conversation. And in just a few minutes, we'll be talking with some of our friends from Council for Life. Over the years, we've had a chance to interview people like Ann Carruth and Rebecca Luntz and Lisa Luby Ryan and Shannon Graham, to mention just a few. We're going to have Suzanne Everbach with us and Leanne Morris. But before we do that, I want to try to set the stage a little bit, because we have a number of things that are happening right now that are very encouraging for those of us in the pro-life movement. Now, the first of which is with something we've already talked about, and Penna Dexter did a commentary about that, which will be airing on Friday, and I've got one coming out next week, all on the Texas Heartbeat Act. But I wanted to give you some of the background, because how is it that since 1973, every attempt by various states and cities and others to try to change Roe versus Wade have failed, because what you end up having is some kind of declaration, usually that it's unconstitutional. There at least is some kind of legal challenge to it or something of that nature. This one actually moved ahead and went from being a bill to a law. So I want to talk a little bit about that for just a minute. And of course, we also want to look ahead to the fact that in addition to that, you also have Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This is a bill that did not become law, but went to the Supreme Court and will be considered by the Supreme Court. So there are just a number of things that we'll be talking about. Of course, Council for Life is an organization that I think very highly of. And if you do not have an organization like this in your community, you need to learn from these two women as we talk about that. But let me give you a little bit of the strategy here, because how is it that a bill, a pro-life bill, actually became law? And it is due to more than just the fact that the Supreme Court decided not to grant an emergency action. It had to do with the fact that they used a legal strategy, and I've posted a very good piece that you can find right now on our website. It is the first article that actually goes into this in some detail about the actual strategy that was developed, because most of the time what you have found is any attempt to really challenge Roe versus Wade, the 1973 decision on abortion, was struck down very quickly. But this one relies on private lawsuits for its enforcement, and so that is rather interesting. Now, I wanted to cover this very briefly because it has led to all sorts of criticism. As a matter of fact, Penna Dexter's commentary, I've already had a chance to read it, talks about how some people have just literally lost their minds over the fact that abortion sort of is illegal now in the state of Texas, sort of, because, of course, there has not been an actual legal challenge per se. But even the Wall Street Journal the other day was criticizing it because they said it was not thought through. And so this is where I thought I would read from the piece that we have posted, because he says, first of all, that's unfair. The heartbeat bill isn't just some slapdash piece of legislation that was thrown together. In some respects, they actually learned from other things that had taken place. Of course, these heartbeat bills for some time have been a very strong priority, arguing that if indeed the cessation of heartbeat is defining death, could not the onset of heartbeat define life? And so as a result, these have in a dozen different states have been proposed, but then they get struck down. And so they recognize how that was a very effective strategy, but it always ended up and having some kind of legal action against it. So the question which was then raised is, okay, if these have failed at one point, is there something else we can do? And that's where they began to say, if you look at this, if we wait for legal challenges, this particular article talks about a Texas dismemberment abortion ban that was supposed to go into effect in 2017. Only now is it being considered before the Fifth Circuit case, court actually en banc. And so they said, well, maybe there might be some other ways to go around that. And they began to see what had happened in a very small town in June of 2019, where the law banned abortion, but the city was not responsible for enforcing it. Instead, the citizens could actually bring a civil lawsuit. Now, it was in a very small town. As a matter of fact, that's a town that doesn't even have an abortion provider. But it began to get some people thinking maybe we could do this at a statewide level. Then you had a fight that took place in Lubbock, Texas, and this was a situation in which the pro-life groups there tried to get the city council to ban abortion. That did not go anywhere. But then the activists got a referendum. It passed 62% to 38%. And again, it relied on this idea of using civil lawsuits rather than an enforcement from the city. Thus, first in the Texas Senate, then in the Texas House, they were able to push forward this bill. And interestingly enough, there's so much controversy right now in the Texas legislature about some of these other hot button bills. Constitutional carry, election reform, which was just signed the other day. But the heartbeat bill kind of just raced on through. And then, of course, everyone assumed that the Supreme Court would strike it down, and they asked for an emergency action. But the Supreme Court did not, because the request for emergency relief was based on the fact that you had a number of defendants listed by the pro-abortion groups, and those were individuals that were not actually empowered by the law to actually enforce the law. So as a result, there wasn't anybody that you could then enjoin from doing so. And so the Supreme Court decided not to decide, 5-4. Meanwhile, what you have, as this one particular article mentions, is there's this huge sword hanging over the heads of the various Texas abortion providers, recognizing that if they do perform an abortion after 6 weeks, then immediately they will be sued by anyone who will then, they would be required to pay at least $10,000 for each illegal abortion. And at the moment, at least according to this article, it says that they have not been able to find anyone in the state of Texas so far that has actually performed an abortion after 6 weeks. So that's just kind of a brief overview that I wanted you to be aware of, because some people have looked at this and said, how is it the Texas law actually became a law and all these other bills simply were struck down, or there was an injunction issued or something like that? And it has to do with this very unique pro-life strategy that was developed in the state of Texas. Now, again, if you'd like to read more about that, it is the first article we've posted there. But when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more, not just about this bill, but the whole pro-life issue and how you can, in your community, do the same kinds of things the Council for Life has been doing in Dallas and other places around the country, because we certainly have a tremendous need to support those people who are on the front lines for life. And certainly, as I have traveled and spoken at various pregnancy resource centers and others, or sat on the boards of various organizations that are speaking to life, we are always so indebted to the Council for Life for what they're doing. So let's take a break. I'm going to give you a little bit of legal strategy. Now we're going to talk about, well, what can we do to actually stand for life in our community? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Once several Democrats returned to the state legislature, Texas was able to pass an election reform bill. A recent commentary by Dr. Merrill Matthews lays out some of the facts about election fraud. One problem is the deceptive way the media covers the issue. Reporters and TV anchors will say that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. That's not the issue. I've heard everyone from Rush Limbaugh to Barack Obama express doubt that there is widespread voter fraud. Instead, critics of voter laws are pointing to what could be considered targeted voter fraud. Texas isn't one of those states where voter fraud is considered rampant. Nevertheless, the Texas Attorney General's office cites 534 cases of successfully prosecuted election fraud offenses since 2005. There are also 510 pending cases against 43 defendants and 386 currently active election fraud investigations. Some of the more prominent cases involve government officials. He provides one example from Texas, but also mentions another case out of Southern California. In that case, a city councilman and others were charged with obtaining fraudulent votes in a runoff election that was decided by one vote. In previous commentaries, I describe elections that were so tainted the elections had to be run again. The title of his commentary is Voter Fraud is Real. Just ask dead voters. He cites a case where a city council candidate committed massive election fraud that included registering a dead man to vote for him. The candidate was a Republican. Dr. Matthews concludes by reminding us of the joke that only dead people vote for Democrats. In this case, a dead man may have voted for a Republican. Here's a better slogan: make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have in studio with us now Suzanne Everbach as well as Leanne Morris. And Suzanne is the Chief Operating Officer for Council for Life. Of course, she served, I guess, for about 16 years on the board of directors, brings experience in law and accounting and all sorts of things, an undergraduate degree, as well as a law degree from Southern Methodist University. And Suzanne, great to have you in studio.
Well, thank you, Kerby. It's an honor to be here.
We have worked with you in other videos, so this will be just great. And I'm getting a chance for the first time to meet Leanne Morris, who is the current president of Council for Life. And the Council for Life, I might just mention, celebrating 20th anniversary. Remember when Ann Caruth was first talking about that? Record a number of various outreaches that you've had. You have 24 different beneficiaries, and I've sat on the board of 2 of those beneficiaries, so I can say thank you for that as well. Sure. And attended Franklin and Marshall College and Emory University School of Law, and it's great to have you here as well.
Oh, it's just a delight to be here, Kerby. Thank you.
And again, Suzanne, let's see if we can just give people, in case they're not familiar with Council for Life, we've talked about it all these years, but give us a little bit of the background, then we'll get into this whole issue of the Heartbeat Bill.
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure to do so, Kerby. Well, I'm thrilled to say that we, Council for Life, is celebrating our 20th year anniversary this year. 20 years ago, Ann Caruth, who you mentioned, and 10 other women in Dallas had it on their hearts to start a conversation about the life issue, specifically abortion, that was taking place. And, back then, Kerby, people weren't really talking about abortion. They weren't using that word. It wasn't discussed in polite social circles. And so these women courageously stepped up and decided that they needed to increase awareness and educate the community about this issue. And what was really important to them, though, is that their message be one of mercy and grace, God's forgiveness, non-judgmental, all about love. And they very, very carefully, thoughtfully, and prayerfully crafted Counsel for Life's mission and our core values, which have more than stood the test of time. And, God has been so faithful to Counsel for Life and gone before us and blessed us abundantly to the extent that we've been able to raise and donate over $9 million to like-minded, life-affirming local agencies here in Dallas and the Fort Worth Metroplex. And if you would allow me, I would love for our listening audience to hear our mission statement and our core values. They really go to the heart of who we are. Counsel for Life exists to empower women, men, and youth to make life-affirming choices. Counsel for Life is motivated by Christ-like love and responsive compassion. CFL is committed to raising public awareness of the complex issues that surround unplanned pregnancies and providing financial support to agencies that share our mission. We believe in the sanctity of life and that life begins at conception. The Word of God is our foundation of truth, and we seek to ensure that all our endeavors glorify God. We're committed to undergirding everything, as I said, that we say and do with love, mercy, grace, and forgiveness, acting in compassion. We believe God redeems us and restores us, and we educate, but we do not legislate. Kerby, as you know, we are not a political organization. And, sometimes that gets a little challenging to navigate because this issue of life and abortion is inextricably linked to politics. And so we do make it a priority to educate our constituents about what is going on in the legislative world, the world of the Supreme Court and the state courts with respect to the life issue. And as you mentioned, a lot is going on right now that we're very heartened by.
I'm encouraged. Again, we have a link to counselforlife.org, so you can find that by clicking on either of the pictures of Suzanne or Leanne. Leanne, let me come to you for just a minute, because I mentioned about the beneficiaries, and my wife will tell you I probably speak at more pregnancy resource center banquets than anywhere else, and yet what I find is oftentimes they're overworked and underfunded. One of the things that Counsel for Life has done is been able to come alongside some of these organizations and fund them, and $9 million. Amazing.
We're quite thrilled that we have been so blessed by generous donors. What we do, Kerby, is we have a beneficiary application process, and actually it's about to start here in the end of September at Park Cities Presbyterian Church. We will hold a forum for any agency that is interested in receiving funds from Counsel for Life. They go through an application process, and we have an information session for them along with a speaker. And this year, it's not just one speaker, it's a panel of speakers addressing healing and support after abortion. Kerby, so many women and men in our country have gone through the grief and sorrow of abortion, and many of them are sitting in our churches in the pews, and we want our churches and our community to be aware of the resources that are available for support and healing and hope after abortion. And so the beneficiary process is one where we go through with board members, current board members, and former board members of Counsel for Life. So men and women who are very familiar with our organization and very familiar with these beneficiaries. We review their applications, we do site visits, we have interviews, and then we meet as a committee, and we vote, and then the vote goes to the board, and we determine which beneficiaries will receive funding this year. And this year, as you said, 20 of them are for our luncheon, what we call our luncheon beneficiaries, and 4 were for our Run for Life adoption and foster care.
We might talk about that for just a minute, because some of these are big events, and occasionally I've been an MC for them or something like that, or just sitting in the audience watching some of these incredible individuals. But then you have a Run for Life, you have golf tournaments. There are a lot of different ways that you have been very successful in raising funds.
Exactly. This year we had our first annual Swing for Life golf tournament, and we had our 12th Run for Life event. And we do want to engage the community in all kinds of ways, and we found that athletic events are one way to engage a certain group within the community. We also host events for pastors to educate them on the life issues and the complex issues surrounding unplanned pregnancies, and then just generally the public. There's a degree of authority that's speaking in the pro-abortion arena, from the Supreme Court through legislators, the executive branch, judicial branch, even now businesses are speaking in the pro-abortion arena. And we want to have a voice for life. And the science, the researchers, the doctors, the scientists who have come up, the engineers who have come up with the sonogram machines, the microscopic video technology that we have now, where we can really see that life truly begins at conception. That baby has all of its chromosomes, its eye color, its hair color, right there in those first days after conception. And you're about to hold up a booklet that also has that information in it. And so we're so glad that we now have the evidence that we can see and we can hear a baby at 6 weeks.
It is just incredible. I just thought I'd hold up for a minute, because actually this booklet includes the material that I spoke at one of the outreaches to the younger group of Counsel for Life, and gave them, if you will, medical arguments against abortion, legal arguments against abortion, philosophical arguments against abortion, and much more, because sometimes people don't know what to say. And Suzanne, that's one of the things that, again, is the educational process. And I've been on the receiving end of some of that, because you also have Breakfast for Us Men. So it's not just a woman's issue, but I've also been on the giving and teaching end of that as well, as you know.
Very much. Yes, I attended that event for the young people where you equipped them to talk about life.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we have a lot more to cover, because after all, I want to get some of your thoughts about this. I know you're not a political organization, but at the same time, the fact that there is a sword hanging over abortion providers in the state of Texas, as one writer put it, means that already life is breaking out here in the state of Texas, and people that are listening in 40 other states today in this program probably want to say, well, what can I do in my community to actually support these organizations, and maybe even think about what we can do in the legislature? But I want, if anything, to see other organizations, they might be called Counsel for Life, they might call it something else, but to do the very same thing that you have been so effective in doing on this 20th anniversary. So first of all, happy anniversary, but let's take a break. And when we come back, if you find yourself saying, I'd like to know a little bit more about the Counsel for Life, you will go to the website right now and click on the picture of either of our two individuals, and it will take you to counselforlife.org, or simply can go there during the break. When we come back, we're going to talk about all the resources on that website right after these important messages.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, or you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again talking about life. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. You may just want to sit back, but I hope you'll take maybe our admonition for you to go to the website for Counsel for Life, look at some of the material that is there, and certainly benefit from that in terms of your own local community. I know there's a real goal to maybe take some of these ideas from Counsel for Life and spread them elsewhere in the state of Texas and all over the country. But also, as you go there, there's some other resources. And Leanne, let me come to you for just a minute, because not only do we do radio, but we also show this video, and you actually have a YouTube channel as well, don't you?
We do, Kerby, and I'm excited about it because you can go to YouTube and search for Counsel for Life, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will see not all 20 years, but I'd say for the past 10 years, our luncheon speakers are recorded and they're on the YouTube channel. And you can hear Nicole C. Mullins. You can hear Ben Watson from last year. Fabulous. Scott Hamilton. Just fabulous. Jennifer O'Neill, speakers and their stories about their experience with the life issue, as well as our pastor event speakers. And those are more in apologetics
Very
on
well
life.
done. Yes.
And they're excellent. We had Bodie Bacham this year for our pastors in 2021. Last year we had Mike Spencer from the Life Training Institute. We've had Scott Klusendorf. We've had just the heavy hitters on the life issue come and give all of us the training that we need, and then we want to share that with your community, communities around the country, communities here in Texas, so that we can equip more people to stand and speak for life.
If you find yourself in a conversation about life and say, that's a good question, I'm not sure I have an answer for that, go to Scott Klusendorf or Greg Kokel or one of those individuals, and they will certainly give you some answers. I had a chance to introduce, I was Peggy Noonan, one of those luncheons, and so I certainly do believe so much in what you're doing. But Suzanne, for just a minute, I mentioned the various beneficiaries. It's a wide range. I did, of course, talk about the pregnancy resource centers, and we really need to pray for them right now, because all of a sudden these abortion-minded women who were convinced that the only answer to their crisis was an abortion now are starting to flood into, and this is good news, to these pregnancy centers, right?
Yes, and it is good news. Praise God. I mean, we have received a number of communications from some of the pregnancy resource centers who we support, and they are seeing a surge in the numbers of these women who are desperate. They are devoid of hope, and they are scared. And these pregnancy resource centers love on these women. They provide them with compassionate care. They connect them to the resources in our community that they need. You know, a lot of these women, some are homeless, some are struggling with addiction or abuse. Many have financial challenges. So they really need support and hope. And our prayer too, Kerby, is that, you know, Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers are having to completely stop providing abortions if a heartbeat is detectable. And so our prayer is that rather than refer these women to out-of-state abortion providers, that they will refer them to these pregnancy resource centers, and that these precious babies who God has created in his image can be saved. And we love the babies, of course, but we love those mamas just as much, and we want to see them succeed. I mean, after they carry that baby to term, whether or not they place it in a loving home for adoption or they decide to parent on their own, we continue to walk alongside them, as do these agencies in the Metroplex who we support.
You know, Matt Walsh is somebody we've had on the program here, and he put out something recently with all the arguments being made, and that's one of them, that you only care about the baby, but you don't care about the children after they're born, which is ridiculous if you know anything about any of the pregnancy resource centers in the country, and a number of other lines that are made there. And again, you talked about a heartbeat. I have seen a remarkable difference, since I'm the old guy around the table, between the pregnancy centers, used to call them crisis pregnancy centers, that did not have a sonogram and those that do.
Right.
And you have actually helped some of these agencies and some of these clinics develop that, because if you have a woman see her baby, that changes everything, doesn't it?
It does. It's a critically important moment, that window to the womb. It becomes real. It's a baby. It's a human being, and it's my baby, you know? So, yeah, that mama instinct.
Leanne, I was just thinking when we're talking about the beneficiaries, I've actually sat on 2 different boards that have actually gone into the schools and talked about abstinence. And that's another one of those myths. Oh, you only worry about it when they're pregnant. No, we want to go upstream and recognize that this culture of death also in some respects is tied in, and maybe some not directly, sometimes other very directly, to the sexuality of our culture. And you do fund some of those organizations too, don't you?
We do, Kerby. Just Say Yes is one of our beneficiaries, and there are other educational outreach, skill development outreach groups that we fund. We fund maternity homes, pregnancy resource centers, educational outlets, the digital marketing experts that are out there that want to intercept a woman's search when she is typing in her search on her phone, pregnant. And we want to be able to reach her when she's considering what all of her options are. And so that's what the digital marketing does. We really want to educate from really birth through final adulthood on the issues of life in the womb. And that does start with young children, even understanding how babies are formed and how the pregnancy develops, how the baby develops in the womb. That beauty of the sonogram, that beauty of the visual technology. If you can see and you can hear a baby, your mind will change. Your thinking will change, and that's what we're hoping to do with funding these beneficiaries.
Again, I can remember when Marlon Maddox was hosting the show, the first time they actually brought someone in to talk about ultrasound, and that was kind of a new idea back in the 1980s, but it really did kind of change everything, because once a woman who up until that time hadn't really been well educated, and there are all sorts of myths and misrepresentation taking place, that is a profound difference, and it also illustrates why the Supreme Court, which back in 1973 said, well, we're not going to decide when life begins, we know a lot more now than we actually did back in 1973. They knew enough then that they should have said abortion should not be legalized, but we know a lot more even since then, don't we?
Absolutely. And it's hard to argue with the science, Kerby. And, we are so encouraged, the young people, this young generation who we were just referring to. One of our beneficiaries is Students for Life of America. Yes. And they are doing so much to educate and empower young people about the life issue. And we had the joy of going to Washington, D.C. for the March for Life in January of 2020, just before the onset of the pandemic. We just made it. And we couldn't believe the young people were there in droves. And so that is really the future of this issue. So we feel really passionately about educating them and empowering them.
That is something that Planned Parenthood and NARAL did not expect, because they, I think, assumed that after you had a whole generation growing up where abortion is legal and never knew a time when it was illegal, they would have thought that would have been over. And actually, Leanna went the other way, and that is the younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life. What about that?
I almost think, Kerby, it is because they have empathy and are closer in age, actually, to that life in the womb. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of thinking, well, I wouldn't want that to happen to me.
Yes.
And so why would I advocate for that to happen to someone really close to my age, if you will? And I really think there's just a sensitivity, a compassion that maybe, adults further away from the womb don't have.
They might be looking around in their classroom and saying, we don't have as many students in this classroom, and maybe some of them were aborted, or maybe even in their own family. I think I would have had a father that would have stayed around, but because of this, that changed. Or I might have had a brother or sister, and they just simply were aborted. But for whatever reason, and I certainly support that as well, and that's another aspect of what you do in Counsel for Life, just educate the next generation. The younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life. So let's take a break. When we come back, I thought we just might talk a little bit more about action items. How can people get involved with you? How could they begin to start something like this? Are there opportunities? And of course, I always always try to point out all the opportunities, find out if there's a pregnancy resource center in your community, find out if your church can reach out. And so maybe you can just share some things you've learned. 20 years, we might as well learn vicariously from you experts here. So that's what we're going to do. And if you would like to join the conversation, you can. But real quickly, we will take those calls, 1-800-351-1212. Or a little bit later when we have an open line in the next hour, we'll cover some of that as well. So if you want to ask a question, feel free to do so. But we're also celebrating the fact that this heartbeat bill became a heartbeat law, and the Texas Heartbeat Act, as I shared just a little bit ago, you can find out more about how it came to be and why, for the first time since 1973, abortion is banned by a state legislative action. Pretty incredible. We'll talk more about that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and if you would like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. As a program note, let me just mention we're going to be talking about the Doubters Club next hour for about a half an hour, and then we'll get into all sorts of other issues in the news. We'll do a little bit of apologetics. I think you will really appreciate that. But let me come back to our guest, and Leanne, let me come to you first, because I would like to give our listeners who say, I want to cultivate and create a culture of life in my family, in my church, in my community. Can you give us some ideas of what you might want to do?
Absolutely. There are fabulous resources available, some on our website. There are books available. As you mentioned, Scott Klusendorf, his analysis of how to talk about life if you just think of the word sled, size and level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. It shouldn't matter the size of the person, the level of development, whether that person is in the womb or has been delivered and is in the nursery in the hospital. Those are some things to keep in mind when you're talking with someone. Would you, at 6 weeks, terminate a pregnancy, kill a life in the womb? Would you, at 6 weeks for that same baby, at 6 weeks after delivery, allow for the heartbeat to be terminated? No, that's murder in our culture. And so why does the environment for that baby matter? Why does the level of development for that baby matter? Why suddenly is there a distinction? So those are some things to keep in mind, and that word sled will help you as you're talking with friends, neighbors, coworkers about the life issue. Just take a calm, steady approach to life and ask questions. Why do they think what they think? But we also have an excellent video on our YouTube channel from Mike Spencer at our Pastor's Breakfast. He really walked through how you can address an apologetics of life. And then a theology of life was from Bodie Bachman this year. He really went through kind of a biblical analysis of life. So lots of resources.
And again, I think pastors can really set the tone for some of this. You know, since I've been involved in the political side, I was noticing this goes back to the 1980s, when sometimes they would have a protest in front of an abortion clinic, and the mainstream media, and even here in the Dallas media, could just kind of set it aside. But as soon as we had pastors show up, that sort of changed the whole dynamic rather dramatically. And so there is a sense in which oftentimes it is the pastor addressing that issue from the pulpit that can really, first of all, say, we believe in life. And then, Suzanne, I'm thinking the other part of that, if a pastor acknowledges that there are probably women in the congregation that have been exploited by abortion, but God's grace is sufficient for you, those are some really important messages to actually give out, don't you think?
Very important messages. And given the fact that 1 in 4 women have had 1 or more abortions, that means there are countless women, men, and families sitting in those pews who are experiencing the devastation and destruction of what abortion can do. There's shame, there's guilt, they need healing. And the church, of all places, should be a safe refuge and haven to which they can turn. And so we would encourage pastors. We know it's a polarizing issue, and not everybody sees this issue the same way by any means, but they've got women facing unplanned pregnancies, and they've got women in desperate need of post-abortion healing. And if these pastors will step up and talk about this and educate themselves about the resources that are in their community, that pregnancy resource center right down the street, that they can help connect those women to, it's invaluable, Kerby, and it's so needed.
I imagine there's some people right now that say, I would like to get some counsel from these smart women. So first of all, you're the CEO now, which I think is pretty exciting that you really have that opportunity. And of course, Leanne is the president this year. So I think you would be available for any kind of consultation, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. We are always available. And I did want to point everyone, we do have a very comprehensive resources section on our brand new website, which we proudly launched a couple of weeks ago. But, Leanne talked about the rigorous research and vetting that we do of our beneficiaries. And all of them are listed, and they're placed in different categories, the pregnancy resource centers, maternity homes, adoption and foster care agencies, youth mentoring, parenting and life skills education. So these women are equipped to be able to sustain themselves and live independent lives, for themselves and to provide for their babies, their families, post-abortion healing, targeted media outreach, and even support for couples who have received a life-limiting diagnosis for their unborn baby but chose to carry their baby to term. there are agencies who will provide them love and support with that brave choice.
I might just mention, if that list came real fast and furious, it's part of the bio there for Suzanne, so you can actually find it on our website and write those out, and that would be something you might want to pass on to individuals. I'm going to give you a homework assignment. One of those is to go to Counsel for Life, and if you click on that upper right-hand corner, then you will see all the material. So it has information about the affiliates, Young Leaders for Life. Let's get some more young people involved in this. Men Stand for Life. And then you have, of course, the grants and things like that. But then the video library, the photo galleries, and, of course, one last time, let's see if we can, Leanne, get a few people going to YouTube and finding that. So what are they looking for when they go to YouTube to find those videos?
Just search Counsel for Life, and then we will come up as a channel, and you can subscribe to our channel, and then you can look through the video list, and we have men's breakfast video from our last men's breakfast with Sean Carney with 40 Days for Life, several other past speakers. We've got luncheon speakers, pastors event speakers, interviews with our beneficiaries, our Celebrating Life luncheon videos where we highlight a few of our beneficiaries each year. So excellent resources available. And we do expect that, there are 55,000 abortions in Texas every year.
Yes.
And 85% of those are performed after 6 weeks. And so we know there's going to be 40,000 mothers coming into pregnancy resource centers. Can you imagine the needs? They need diapers. They need funding. They need more sonogram machines. And so the need is great. And for our friends and, supporters of life, we want them to kind of recognize the need right now and join us in celebrating life.
Absolutely, Leanne. And they need volunteers. Yeah. These agencies need people to come in and help them with this tremendous workload that they have. They want to be able to provide this compassionate care to the most vulnerable in our community. And maybe you don't feel like you're equipped. Maybe you don't feel like you can counsel a young woman who's abortion-minded. They will train you.
And those individuals that are right now doing the counseling at one point probably didn't think they could do it as well. And, of course, if you have ever been exploited by abortion, sometimes you are the most effective person in those particular clinics. And so whether you are a woman that was affected by abortion or a man who counsels someone for abortion, I think there are some real opportunities for your ministry as well. It is always exciting to have anybody from Counsel for Life here, but really exciting to have the two of you here today. So thank you so very much for coming in. And at a time when the Texas Heartbeat Act is a bill and then a law, I thought it would be very appropriate to talk about that. Of course, we'll be watching what the Supreme Court does on a case out of Mississippi. So thank you both for being here, and always look forward to the next opportunity.
It was our pleasure. Thank you, Kerby.
Again, one more time, you might find yourself saying, I want to send this to someone. Go to that red button there. It says watch or listen. So you could download this podcast and send it to someone, or the watch button. Of course, pretty soon it will be up on the YouTube channel, and you can find it there as well. There are other people that need to know about life, and certainly you could benefit from these two women as they've been in studio with us today. But I need to take a break. When I come back, we're going to talk about whether or not we could ever have doubt. Of course we have doubt. How do we address that? We'll be talking about that on Point of View right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you've been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking first about the subject of doubt, and in particular, how we can engage other individuals that perhaps have very significant questions or maybe even great deal of skepticism about Christianity. And we've talked about the opportunities that you can create in that regard on this program. A while back, for example, we had both Christians and atheists on this program talking about the Christian Atheist Book Club, and James Walker was the individual that pulled that together. And we want to once again kind of highlight another organization or outreach that you might want to know about called the Doubters Club. And it is the title of this book, Doubters Club: Good Faith Conversations with Skeptics, Atheists, and the Spiritually Wounded. It is written by Preston Ulmer, who is the founder and director of the Doubters Club. Individual also has served in the past as the director of network development for the Church Multiplication Network, has 2 master's degrees, one in religion, one in divinity, and really his experience and education caused him first to plant a church in Denver, Colorado, and then also to found the Doubters Club. So, Preston, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be on here.
And I might just mention that Mark Batterson has been on the program with us many times before. Actually says
Great.
About your book, if you're a doubter, welcome to the club. This book will make you laugh, make you cry, and make you think. And early on, you point out the fact that you're a fellow traveler. In other words, it's not like, oh, I've got it all figured out here and I've never had any doubt. You actually tell the story about doubt, don't you?
I do. Yeah, it's part of my journey, and anytime I'm talking about the book, I say I do have a personal bias towards allowing doubt into the way that we process Jesus, and I think that he has a bias to it as well, but it's part of my journey for sure, and continues to be part, but doesn't shake my faith like it used to.
Now, one of the things that you point out early on is that there is this phrase, great minds think alike, which is, of course, not true, because I have been around very smart individuals who are absolutely convinced that there are no intellectual arguments that can be justified for even believing the existence of God, much less that Jesus was the Son of God or that the Bible is historically accurate. So you really kind of take us on this journey that sometimes people will think, well, if they just get enough information, if we can just maybe tell them to, I like one example that somebody gave you, sleep on the Bible. That was you're not making this up. They actually suggested that maybe your doubts would go away if you would lay your head on the Bible instead of a pillow. Is that true?
It is true. And I don't know if it was that I used the NIV, not the ESV or what, but
wrong translation.
They thought, that's right. They thought osmosis was going to get it in my head. And the reality is, just like you just mentioned, great minds don't think alike. We just know that even on the team of the disciples, when Jesus was walking on this earth, they just all thought so differently, just like on the show where you talk about politics or you talk about religion. I mean, that the Jesus team was diverse in the way that they thought. And I think that if we don't allow these safe spaces and processing, it's actually not going to move the needle forward whenever it comes to seeing people come to faith.
Let's talk about the need for just a minute. You quote early on another individual we've had on the program, John Dickerson, but whether you look at his book, The Great Evangelical Recession, or more recently, I've just been doing lots of interviews on this new survey we did at Pro Ministries of over 3,000 individuals. The fastest growing demographic for Generation Y, Millennials, and Generation Z, fastest growing demographic are the unaffiliated, oftentimes called the nuns. The people that when asked, what is your religious affiliation, say atheist, agnostic, or no preference. And that number has gone from 13% to, at least on our survey, 35%. So it seems to me that a doubters club is going to be even more important here in the 21st century. Wouldn't you agree?
I think so. I think that there is a record number of people that are taking apart their ideas, their practices, their whole belief system, and they're breaking it into smaller components, and they're looking for, is this useful? Does this make an impact? And some of them, not all of them, are asking the question, is this truthful? And Doubters Club gatherings, they don't just allow that, but they commit to one another in the reconstruction process. So I think it's needed more now than ever.
Talk about the structure for a little bit, because as you go through the book, I kind of learn it, but there's a sense in which this was a little bit of an evolutionary process to figure out how you convene them, various kinds of requirements and those kinds of things. So if we want people to take this and franchise it, maybe develop something like that in their community, since we broadcast about 40 different states, and they might say, yeah, this might be something we might want to do in our community. Can they learn some vicarious lessons about what to do and not do?
For sure. And we have learned along the way, just like anything. So if they are interested, obviously they can go to the doubtersclub.com and contact us. We have trainings involved that help them do that. But I'll tell you that the way that it works is we say, okay, there is a mission, and it is the vision of it is pretty fierce. We just say we want to model friendship and pursue truth with people who don't think like us. So it is co-moderated. Each gathering is with a believer, a Christian, and a non-believer. It could be atheist, agnostic, Muslim, but they have to be friends in real life. They bring their friend group in, and then the community come in. And so you have this gathering, takes place once a month. We have 5 ground rules that really are, everything from we value respect above being right to this is a safe place. And we talk about the topic that the group voted on the time before. So for everyone who is a Jesus follower that goes to church and they're listening, if you can imagine an unsaved congregation picking the next sermon, that's kind of what it feels like for the Christian moderator. And for 15 minutes, the two will go back and forth to model friendship. There's levity to the room. There's honest discussion. And hopefully, and we really get at this in the training, that there's humility that's being first displayed by the Christian. And then for the next hour, it's open for discussion, but the whole thing is, if there's truth to be found, let's find it together, and let's be honest along the journey. And then everybody votes on the topic, and then they go on with their lives, and it becomes a lifestyle. But that's more or less, that's how the gathering goes.
Again, we have a link, first of all, to the website, which you can find, thedoubtersclub.com. Also have a link to your Twitter page, your Facebook page, and a number of others. And if you find yourself saying, I'd kind of like to get that book, it just came out yesterday. The release date was the 7th of September. So your best bet is to actually go to that website and find it. It is published by Nav Press, and it probably will show up eventually in your Christian bookstore. But there is a place for you to go and join the club. There are some videos and other things for you to watch, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about what that looks like and how you can develop that. But this is a great opportunity to develop some of those conversations. We've talked about the Atheist Christian Book Club that we have actually featured here in the past. I know I've spoken at Club Dada to groups that were pretty hostile, and we even now have an event that some of our colleagues go to, the Bible and Beer Consortium. So those kinds of things exist, but if you want to develop a Doubters Club in your community, we're going to come back and talk about how to do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Once several Democrats returned to the state legislature, Texas was able to pass an election reform bill. A recent commentary by Dr. Merrill Matthews lays out some of the facts about election fraud. One problem is the deceptive way the media covers the issue. Reporters and TV anchors will say that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. That's not the issue. I've heard everyone from Rush Limbaugh to Barack Obama express doubt that there is widespread voter fraud. Instead, critics of voter laws are pointing to what could be considered targeted voter fraud. Texas isn't one of those states where voter fraud is considered rampant. Nevertheless, the Texas Attorney General's office cites 534 cases of successfully prosecuted election fraud offenses since 2005. There are also 510 pending cases against 43 defendants and 386 currently active election fraud investigations. Some of the more prominent cases involve government officials. He provides one example from Texas, but also mentions another case out of Southern California. In that case, a city councilman and others were charged with obtaining fraudulent votes in a runoff election that was decided by one vote. In previous commentaries, I describe elections that were so tainted the elections had to be run again. The title of his commentary is Voter Fraud is Real. Just ask dead voters. He cites a case where a city council candidate committed massive election fraud that included registering a dead man to vote for him. The candidate was a Republican. Dr. Matthews concludes by reminding us of the joke that only dead people vote for Democrats. In this case, a dead man may have voted for a Republican. Here's a better slogan: make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Preston Ulmer. The book is entitled The Doubters Club. It is just out, and you should be able to eventually find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link to his website, and you can find out much more. Good faith conversations with skeptics, atheists, and the spiritually wounded. And I think for just a minute, Preston, we should illustrate the fact that much of your book applies whether an individual listening to this right now wants to start a Doubters Club or even attend one, because all of us have some relationship with non-Christians, although I'll admit, as you point out, sometimes we tend to be in a bubble. We don't have some of those, but if we wanted to be successful in building a relationship and inviting conversation, you have a number of very important principles that all start with the letter I: impression, intention, invitation, initiation, imitation. Can we kind of go through those? Because whether you're going to start a Doubters Club, join one or not, this, I think, is just great material in your new book that helps people understand how to carry on a conversation with somebody that maybe is disagreeing with you, but how to do that in a way that might actually bring some kind of spiritual fruit.
Yeah, well, it really, the book was written, you kind of mentioned this earlier, that if people want to start a club, that's great, but it was written as, how do we do this as a lifestyle? That it's not just a new thing we do, it's a new way to do everything. And so those 5 I's really are, how do I be intentional with people that don't think like me? And how do I think through this relationship over the long term, that I'm not just in it for the short-term conversion or for the short-term church attendance or fill in the blank, whatever our ulterior motives are. So we say the first I is impression, that it's really important that you rebuild the impression that the person has of you, if it's a bad impression, because ultimately we're going to be talking about with this person things that matter. So we got to be trustworthy with things like we follow through with barbecues with our neighbors and so on and so forth. The second I is intention. What is our intention? As Christians, we have ultimate motives that we will ultimately want to see everyone have life with Jesus because of our worldview. However, we should never have ulterior motives, which is, I'll be your friend until or so that. And so that's the intention piece. The third one, invitation. I actually say in the book, into real life, not to a church service. How do we invite people into the natural rhythms of our life? The fourth one of initiation. How do we initiate conversations that matter? Because if you've done the first three I's, then it's actually weird to only talk about sports and weather all the time. We have to be talking about meaningful things because now we have people in our life. And the fifth one is imitation. It is, is there a mission that we can live on mission? Is there something we could do that we're living on mission together because mission stirs our affections? So that really is what we see in the Doubters Club. We put it in a book so that it can be the lifestyle for anybody.
One of the things you talk about, and I've used this before over the years, is the piece from James Ingle, What's Gone Wrong with the Harvest. Now, of course, when he wrote that book, I was just finished off with college, and I was paying attention to this. But I've used this illustration before that sometimes people always want to get to the goal line. Since we're getting into the NFL season, you recognize that the really successful teams benefit from the 5-yard gain. Yeah, there's some times when they just rear back and they throw a Hail Mary and they get a touchdown. But the point you make, and you kind of change that a little bit from the decision to follow Jesus to missional living, there's a sense in which we, I think, violate some of those principles because we tend to think that if I share the gospel with an individual or I share that I'm a Christian and share why I believe that, then immediately they're going to get down on their knees and accept Jesus Christ and thus be ready to go to the mission field. And we all know that's not the case, and yet I think you wisely point out that there is a sense in which a dynamic that you have with the skeptic, the atheist, the spiritually wounded is kind of a longer process. And so there's a sense in which, if I can use my football analogy, every once in a while you're on the red zone and you share something with an individual and they become a Christian. But most of the time, the great value is the 5-yard gain. If you can move somebody from a -2 to a -1 or something of that nature, that's going to be very significant when you're dealing with people that are skeptical and atheistic in their outlook. True?
Oh, yeah, and that's a great way of putting it as well. I think that another piece that we have to remember is, on the Ingle scale, if it's a number line for those people listening, and in the book I say if 0 is salvation and +10 is missional living, surrender to Christ, then there is a negative side of the scale. But as we grow towards a +10, as we grow towards the heart of God, it's actually imperative to our personal growth that we are engaging with the -10s over the long haul, that we are creating these meaningful friendships where we're living sacrificially for the person who does not think like us. And in that way, we're being very much like Jesus as he displays the face of God on the cross. So I do think, those little incremental wins are a big deal. And I think it's also crucial for our personal growth as well.
One of the chapters you talk about, we, of course, have over the years interviewed George Barna and now, of course, Dave Kinnaman and some of the others. But the Barna Group has found that Christians are really backing away from evangelism, which is one of the reasons we do some programs on evangelism and apologetics. But that's in your section on Cliff's Notes. The other day I used that in my Sunday school class, even held up a Cliff's Notes and said, how many of you knew those? And not only did the hands go up, but some of them said, I would not have actually been able to even understand Shakespeare without the Cliff's Notes. So you have a whole chapter here on including with the Cliff's Notes, how to get this party started. So talk about if people are saying, okay, you've convicted me, maybe I need to reach out to my non-Christian friend or somebody in the business world that I know or somebody in the neighborhood. How do I get started?
Yeah, well, we just say, just very much realize it is the heart of God that we go to the people who are spiritually on the cliff. And that's when, in Luke 14, that's God saying, hey, go as far out there, and we're not going to start the party until the whole table's full. So that's the reference there. If they want to, if they say, I want to start a Doubters Club, well, then reach out to us through the doubtersclub.com. Email, you can fill out a form. You can just send an email. They can email me at preston@thedoubtersclub.com. But I would say, regardless if they decide to start the club, like you just mentioned, with their neighbor, they need to be able to say, okay, I can do these 5 eyes. I can do this. Whatever eye you're at right now, just commit to the next one. And with the help of the Spirit, then you'll find yourself living missionally with one another eventually.
Let's talk about what is on your website. First of all, of course, there's a place where people can pre-order it. Now it's out. You can actually get it. And there's a place where you can join the club. There's a download that you have for conversation starters for Christians and doubters. Then, of course, there's a place where you can subscribe and all sorts of videos. So can you kind of give us a brief overview of what's there? Because my goal is not to just get people to buy the book, although that certainly would be great, but also to connect up with you through the website, which we have at our website, pointofview.net.
Yeah, so we do have a Doubters Club community that's online. It's not on Facebook because, people tend to argue so much on Facebook, believe it or not. So we have a private community that when people say they would like to be part of the Doubters Club community, they join it, they sign up through the website, and what they get is weekly, they get challenges, they get exclusive content, they get blog posts, and I'm constantly interacting with our Doubters Club community, figuring out what's the target for them over the next few months. So it's a missional community that want to do this as a lifestyle for the long haul.
Well, again, congratulations on the book. Just came out, and so now people can start looking for it in their local bookstore. But I think the best way to connect is to simply go to Doubters Club and to get some of that information. We have all that information on our website. And so, Preston, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. And I suspect we'll probably have a chance to connect up with you again. But congratulations on the publication of the book. And I encourage people to connect up with you through our website, pointofview.net, or go directly to, of course, the Doubters Club. Either way, they can do so. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we have some issues in the news to cover. Matter of fact, it'll be relatively short since we only have about a half an hour left, but I'll try to cover a few things that have been in the news, some of which get us back to a statement I made yesterday. I hate to keep saying this. We really need to fact check the fact checkers. This is really getting out of hand. And so I did want to cover that briefly just because it is an illustration, again, of the need for us to have some level of discernment. And once we find some really egregious errors, this time coming with Rolling Stone and CNN and a couple others, it's important for us to at least acknowledge that that is happening so that you will be wise and maybe even just a little bit of skeptical about everything that you see, read, and hear. That's a good thing. And so we encourage you to have a level of discernment, but we do need to take a break. We have quite a number of articles we've posted here today on the website, as well as information about Counsel for Life on the Doubters Club. So go to the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, about a half an hour left on the program, and I thought we might just get into a couple of issues in the news. Just before we do so, my commentary today is on voter fraud. It was actually based on a commentary that was written by Dr. Merrill Matthews, and he talked a little bit about that when he was on the program over a week ago on a Friday. But I thought it was appropriate that it landed today because just recently you have the governor of the state of Texas actually signing the voter reform law, which is in many cases being vilified just like the one in Georgia was. And so this, I think, if nothing else, would be helpful to you if you have a conversation with individuals saying, I just can't believe the attempts at voter suppression. And I get so tired of these comments being made by individuals saying that voter suppression is taking place when I know fully well that if you could actually get them in a room away from all of their friends and peers and political hacks, they might begrudgingly admit that really there's nothing that controversial about these laws, but nevertheless out in public are constantly referring to these as voter suppression. And as I point out in the commentary that Dr. Merrill Matthews did, he first of all points out how in some cases the media is even not reporting it accurately because, as I point out, so often you'll hear reporters, TV anchors, and others saying there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. As I point out, this is not in Dr. Merrill Matthews' piece, but I pointed out that I've heard everybody from, Rush Limbaugh to Barack Obama expressing doubt about widespread voter fraud. The issue has always been whether or not there was targeted voter fraud. But to use Texas as an example, since more recently we've used Georgia as an example, but since this now particular law actually has been implemented and also, by the way, is being challenged in the courts, of course you expect that, you do remind us that if you go to the Texas Attorney General's office, 534 cases of successfully prosecuted election fraud offenses since 2005, 510 pending cases against 43 defendants, and 386 active election fraud investigations. So obviously there's a little bit of fraud that even in a state like Texas, which has never been really seen as a place where there was any significant amount of voter fraud, but even in a state like Texas, you have those numbers. And then, of course, he gives us some examples from a variety of others. But the title of his commentary was kind of interesting. Voter fraud is real, just ask the dead voters, because he uses an example of a city council candidate who committed massive election fraud, including, one example, registering a dead man to vote for him. And so it's a piece that we posted just because I think the piece that was out by Dr. Merrill Matthews was worth some attention, but also it is probably very appropriate right now since you're going to hear all sorts of claims about Jim Crow 2.0. You're going to hear comments about the fact that voter fraud does not exist, and these election reform bills are an attempt to find a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. We try to at least give you some of the facts and numbers in case you have a conversation with individuals that are convinced that this is something that is simply being drummed up by individuals who are trying to make an election year issue. So anyway, that's on the website, and you can read it and pass it on to others, post it on your Facebook page or Twitter feed or whatever you might want to do. But for just a few minutes, did want to talk about what has become the war over ivermectin. You might say, what is that? Well, that is a particular drug that some individuals have taken as a therapeutic dealing with COVID-19. Now, the reason I bring it up is, first of all, it's a good example of why when you see a story, you sometimes need to be skeptical about it, because the original story was this. Rolling Stone magazine said that they had talked to an individual in the state of Oklahoma who was a doctor and said that the emergency rooms in Oklahoma, in his area, emergency rooms were jam full, and it was hard to even treat patients because so many people in these emergency rooms had been taking ivermectin, which was always been described as a horse dewormer. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. And so they've been stealing this from various cattle supply stores, taking it, and they've made themselves sick, and they've jammed up the emergency room. You got the idea? That's kind of the argument being made. And then Rolling Stone magazine very quickly had to step back and say, wait a minute. We actually got this story from one individual. This individual alleged that he worked in the hospital, and the hospital said he hasn't been working there for years. And, of course, they sort of backed off the story. But that is almost too late, because it was then carried on all the places you'd expect to be carried on, MSNBC, CNN, and all the rest. And then there's even been an attempt more recently for CNN to come back and say, well, there are some examples of that, which, again, when you first saw the story, there was a part of me that said, okay, it's almost implying that people in Oklahoma are really stupid. Number two, that they were actually trying to go in to get a drug that was actually made for horses to actually treat themselves. And, of course, it sort of broke down pretty quickly. But then it, I think, has morphed into a different story, because Joe Rogan, who is a very popular podcaster, went on the air the other day to say that he had COVID-19. In the process, he was saying that I think he was going to take a couple of things, if I remember right, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and a couple of other things. And the way it was reported by CNN was that he took horse dewormer. So then Joe Rogan said, do I have to sue CNN? They're making this up. He used words that I wouldn't use, but nevertheless, they keep saying I took a horse dewormer. I literally got it from a doctor. And again, you have to know a little bit about ivermectin. Matter of fact, I've noticed now that on a couple of broadcasts, people won't even mention the word, because they're fearful that people will go get maybe the horse dewormer pills instead of getting ivermectin from the doctor, because it is a medically useful treatment, therapeutic. It's been used by Joe Rogan. It's been used by, I'm trying to think of some other people. Dennis Prager, I think, had said he'd used it as well. And that was a good example of how there was an attempt to make him look like some kind of hack, because instead of acknowledging that it is a medically useful substance, and there's a real debate about how effective it is, we can leave that for another day, by simply saying that he was taking a horse dewormer, you have all of those issues as well. CNN, after using that, then got criticized for something else. This is an article from Michael Austin, in which CNN can't stand that Joe Rogan, it says, recovered from COVID. So then they showed the video that he made, looks like maybe from an iPhone, and the podcast, they've tried to make the video make him look sicker than they really were. People looking at that said that what they did was they took the video saturation and upped the yellow on the saturation to make him look more jaundiced. And at least one study has shown that bilirubin levels, bilirubin is the main cause of jaundice, appear higher in patients with COVID-19. So this has gone from kind of bad to worse in terms of, first of all, you've had Rolling Stone magazine actually suggesting that the reason you have had so many individuals not being able to be treated in the emergency room, these places in Oklahoma, is because so many people have been taking this horse dewormer, and they have clogged the emergency room, all of which is not true. And then CNN has, first of all, actually changed the video to make Joe Rogan look sicker, and saying that he was taking horse dewormer. And at this point, you can begin to see that we are now starting to have what I call the ivermectin wars, the way we used to have the wars about hydroxychloroquine. Because now, for our listeners up in Ohio, You have an appeals judge that actually has ruled that the hospital no longer has to actually give any patient ivermectin, a treatment that is often used for viral illnesses, and because they actually were arguing that the physician did not have to try that particular treatment. And so now we've gone from it being debated, if you will, in the court of public opinion, even now in a lower court appeal. So it's an ongoing battle, and the lesson you can learn is, first of all, just because you see a story, even on television, just because you see it on the internet, doesn't necessarily make it's true. Just because you see the video doesn't necessarily mean that the video wasn't maybe tampered a little bit. And just because somebody says that an individual took horse dewormer because they wanted to make the person look like an idiot, there is, of course, a medically useful way in which ivermectin can be used. And so all the rest to remind us once again, you need a lot of discernment these days with what's being portrayed in the media. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, so again, just a few more comments real quickly, and maybe we'll get on to another topic about being careful with what you read, see, and hear. This one comes from Jim Garrity, and I will admit that until I read this, I did not know that because we've been hearing about the need for vaccination. Okay, got that. And we've been hearing that 62.5% of Americans have one shot, which still is pretty good, but the argument that is being made by the CDC is if you only get one shot, then you're not fully vaccinated until you have two shots, and then a few weeks after that, then we'll consider you fully vaccinated. So it's an interesting statement. First, when you realize that just the other day we were having lunch with an individual that had the Johnson & Johnson, that is only one shot. Then you realize, as we've talked about on numerous occasions, that if an individual has already had the virus, they already have the natural antibodies, so that percentage would be higher. So I've always been kind of a little bit questioning the 62% number. But I really should have questioned it. And again, credit to Jim Garrity, because I didn't know this. He says, if you really want to look at this, look at the individuals that would be seniors. Okay, that'd be 65 years of age and older. 92.4% of them have had at least one shot. If you look at all the American adults, it's 75%. And I'm like, okay, I didn't realize that. Okay, so where does this 62% come from? Well, that figure includes about 50 million American children age 11 and younger who can't get vaccinated yet. So again, you've heard the phrase, there are statistics, there are bad word statistics and all the rest. You know, they're just lies, statistics and all that. And so that is, I think, a really striking number. 92.4% of those individuals, probably most at risk, have at least had one vaccination, and of course now they're talking about a third one. But he then goes on to remind us that we just have policies that make no sense. And I'll just give you three of what are about a dozen ones. But Oregon, for example, fully vaccinated citizens still have to wear masks outdoors. First of all, he says, leave aside the fact that the transmission of the virus outdoors is extremely and exceptionally rare, he says. It doesn't distinguish between vaccinated and unvaccinated. In Hawaii, don't forget that Hawaii has one of the best vaccination records. 75% of all Hawaiians have received at least one shot of a vaccine, one of the best rates in the country, but nevertheless, bars and restaurants must close at 10 p.m. in Hawaii. And I love, he says, assuming that maybe the virus is like a vampire and most active at night, which makes no sense. And then I'll just pick on one university, University of Michigan. And University of Michigan, as far as we can determine, 92% of the students and 90% of the faculty are fully vaccinated. But masks are required indoors. But that's not enough. They just had a petition the other day signed by 700 faculty and graduate student instructors that actually signed a petition calling for required testing twice a week, allowing 6 feet of space between each person in a room, and a mandatory 14-day quarantine policy for vaccinated close contacts of positive cases. And like he says, let me spell it out for you. There's absolutely no reason that two people who are vaccinated and wearing masks need to be 6 feet apart. He goes through this long, long list, and it is head shaking because we have so become terrified by the COVID-19 and the other variants that we're starting to lose perspective on what works and what doesn't work. We are constantly being told that if you're vaccinated, you're safe, and now the answer is no, and we're going to treat everybody as if there is no difference between being vaccinated and not being vaccinated. And it's just a good example of foreign policy and domestic policy and government policy just going crazy. And we've been talking about this with Afghanistan. We've been talking about this with the vaccine. We're talking about this in terms of our border. And it just is, again, a reminder that we need to bring some common sense into the public arena pretty quickly. But since we started with the heartbeat bill, at the beginning. I thought we'd end with that because Penna Dexter has a commentary coming out on Friday, but I thought I'd give you a preview because she quotes from Matt Walsh, who's been on the program with us, who said, if you have ever had any doubt about which is the bad side on the culture war, this week ought to clear up your confusion. He says leftists are mad, screamingly, deliriously mad that fewer babies will die in Texas. And, of course, it is all about this heartbeat law. And I may even publish this, but Matt Walsh the other day actually takes you through the arguments that he has run into over the last couple of days from people that, again, don't have a great deal of common sense. And they are all making statements that just don't actually pass the straight face test or certainly wouldn't be considered examples of good logic in a logic and philosophy class in high school or college. And one of those, of course, is that you can't make an argument against abortion unless you're a woman. Of course, Matt Walsh has a lot of fun with that because now we're being told that it isn't just women that can actually have a baby, but men as well. These would be, of course, men that are transgender, but nevertheless, the transgender men are a woman that still has that ability to do so. Number two, the argument that women should not be forced to reproduce, and it takes us back to the fact that, reproduction begins at conception or fertilization, or should a woman be allowed to kill what she has produced? The answer to that is no, but there is the attempt to redefine the word reproduce. Of course, just as we've redefined what it means to be a transgender man. Then pro-lifers want to control women's bodies. Of course, that doesn't pass the straight face test if you think about the fact that many of the most prominent pro-life individuals, like the two women that we've had here today with Counsel for Life, are indeed women, and recognize that we are always encouraging women to have their freedom, but when their freedom means killing something, ultimately a baby inside the womb, that's a little different. Then number four was the pro-lifers are only pro-birth. They don't care about children after they're born. We talked about that earlier. If you know anything about the pregnancy resource centers, you know that they have worked so hard to not just save the baby, but also to save the mother and to provide for the mother. And when we even the other day talked about the idea of trying to provide diapers for the mothers, who do you think those are for? They're not for the mother, they're for the baby, which they're saving. And then number five, the pro-life movement is just a bunch of men bossing women around. He says, once again, we have an argument that could be completely accurate and it would still do nothing to discredit our case. Either the pro-life position is wrong or it's right. If it's right, it would still be right if men were the only one arguing for it, but obviously that's not the case because men are not the only ones. We just, of course, had a great illustration of two very intelligent and articulate women arguing the case. And then finally, the argument women have the right to choose, as he points out, is a concept without meaning or content. So anyway, Matt Walsh has taken on some of the arguments, which are not very good arguments, for why the pro-life law, which is out of the state of Texas called the Texas Heartbeat Act, why it should be implemented, and more importantly, why the Supreme Court, when it takes up the case out of a Mississippi law, should also be considered as well. So Penna Dexter's commentary on Friday, and of course Matt Walsh takes on some of those arguments that you can find that as well. But as we come to the end, let me encourage you to, first of all, if you did not have a chance to hear the first hour discussion on Counsel for Life, great material, and we have a link to that website, counselforlife.org. And of course, we also talked with Preston Ulmer about the Doubters Club, and I've posted a couple of other articles that you would like to read there as well. All of that is available on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to listen to it again, click on that button that says watch or listen. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.